To my new ways of being audience. Welcome to a new episode. And I am pleased to let you know that my guest today is Neale Donald Walsch. And we're going to talk about his book, GodTalk, and some conversations about communicating with God, talking with God. And I'm looking forward to this because, well, I tell you, Neale, since Uh, we we met previously. I've been through some interesting experiences in talking with God as well. But I assume that everyone listening has heard of Neale. But Neale Donald Walsch is the author of many, many books related to the conversations with God. The four big books, and those were dialogues with God. And today we're going to talk with Neale and see what he is up to and talk about God talk. All right, so let me see here. Yeah, I think I was just thinking about whether we had to do anything with the view, and we do not. We should be good to go. So, Neale, without uh, more introduction than that, I will let you join in now and say a few words about what you've been up to. I know you keep cranking out the books, but I know you're involved with Humanities Team and other things as well. So tell the audience what you're doing.
Well, Ray, I'm just living a normal life here in my home in Southern Oregon. I continue to write when the urge envelops me. And so I have written a number of books in my life, but I don't think that I'm embarked on some extraordinary adventure other than the fact that I sometimes have some thoughts and I put them down in writing. What's interesting about the book that we're having a chance to talk about today, the book titled God Talk, is that it came into being, Ray, in an entirely different way. Normally when an author has something he wants to say, he or she would put it into writing and then try to find a publisher. Maybe if they have a literary agent, the literary agent would, what they call shop it around.
Uh-huh.
To see if they could find a publisher. But in my case, that in this particular instance, for the first time in my life, my phone rang, and it was a publisher calling me. That's never happened. I'm 81 years old. That's never happened in my life. But a publisher called me, and they said, "Would you be interested in writing a book for us?" And I said, "Well, golly, what did you have in mind?" And they said, "We would love you to write a book about how people can have their own conversation with God. Since you claimed that you've had a conversation with God, maybe you could explain to us how that happened in your life, and maybe you could share with us ways in which the average person could have their own conversation with God." I said, "Well, I'd be delighted to write that book." So I did. It took me, really, frankly, it came through so fast. Ray, the book was written in 4.5 or 5 weeks. Less than a month and a half, the book was done. And I gave, because it wasn't really big, fat, big, thick book. It was one of those little thin books like the 1 Minute Manager, But it was nice, and I sent it to them. And then they did something interesting. They went on the internet and they asked people around the world if they have had their own interaction or intervention from the divine. And they told me, they called me later and said they received hundreds of emails from people around the world saying that they too had interventions with the divine and interactions, with God directly in their personal life. So they took 8 or 9 of what they felt were the most interesting of those stories and actually put them in the book titled God Talk, because they wanted to let people know that it was not just about this one guy, out there in Oregon who claims to have had an intervention with God, but that there were people all over the world claiming this to have a similar experience in their life. So that's the story behind the book, God Talk. And that's what I've been doing lately, is just letting people know about the book and hopefully sharing some ideas from that literature. And that's what I've been really up to in the past year or two since the book was first published.
Okay, very good. I wondered about that because it's got some very good stories in there that you were just referring to, and I was wondering about, had people written to you and said, "Hey, this is what happened," but took a little different turn to get published. So that's fascinating. I want to ask you the question about the dialogues that you had that produced Conversations with God, books 1, 2, 3, and 4. Would you describe those as telepathic conversations? Because that's the way I imagine them to be.
Gosh, that's an interesting question. I the term telepathic is fascinating. Not quite sure what people really understand or what they mean by the term telepathic, but I can tell you how it was for me. I simply had a long list of questions in my mind to ask God, because my life, when this was occurring, had not been going well. I had run into a series of uh, challenging events, and actually all at one time. I lost my relationship, lost my job, and lost my health, all within the same 10-day period.
Oh, wow.
My marriage ended. It wasn't acrimonious. It was, gentle ending, but we both just agreed it wasn't working. But I didn't want to see that relationship end. And 5 days later, I lost my job because the corporation I worked for had to downsize. And I was the last person they hired. So last person in, first person out, because of seniority regulations. So I lost my relationship, and 5 days later, lost my job. Now, as if that wasn't bad enough, Ray, I'm driving to an interview for a new job, which I'm sure I'm going to get because I had all the qualifications, and my former boss gave me a glowing letter of recommendation. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get this new job. I never got to the job interview because an elderly gentleman misjudged the distance between our two cars. He was driving north, I was driving south. He made a left turn in front of me.
Oh, my.
And crashed into my car, crashed right into the driver's side.
Wow.
And so I was severely injured. I wound up with a broken neck, and it wasn't a hairline fracture. I recall the wording on the report because it was so specific. I was told that I had suffered a 3/4 inch avulsion fracture of the 7th cervical vertebrae posteriorly. In other words, a break in the back of my neck big enough to put a pencil through.
Wow.
And when I woke up at the hospital, of course, they rushed me to the emergency room, and they filled me through painkillers. When I woke up from the anesthesia, the doctor looked at me and he said, "It's amazing you're still alive. Most people who have that kind of a break in their neck die instantly because of spinal cord complications.
Wow.
But not only did you not die, those who do survive, those few who do survive, usually wind up paralyzed from the neck down. You, Mr. Walsch, have suffered neither consequence. So what do you intend to do with your life? Because I consider you a walking miracle."
Wow. He asked you that?
Yes. He said,
Amazing.
because he was so shocked by the fact that I escaped both death and paralysis with that kind of an injury. But they did fit me with what they call a Philadelphia collar. A Philadelphia collar is a plastic collar that you wear, under your chin, and it covers your entire neck. And it's to hold. And the doctor said you're not to take this off for any reason. You don't take it off to take a shower. You don't take it off to sleep. You don't take it off for any reason whatsoever, because it's holding your head up.
Wow.
Because we're going to wait. We're going to allow your neck to heal by fusing rather than inserting, a device to fill that 3/4 inch space, because they found that's the best way for long-term healing of that kind of an injury. So I had to wear this collar, Ray, and here's a problem. Nobody would hire me. I was going to job interview after job interview, but nobody would hire me, even though I had the qualifications and this wonderful letter of recommendation. Finally, the seventh man who was interviewing me was honest with me. He said, "Mr. Walsh, we would hire you in 30 seconds with your qualifications and your experience. If you weren't wearing that therapeutic device around your neck, we can't put you on board here with that device, because clearly you're not fully healed. And if you make one wrong move on the job, and we're paying your hospital bills for the next 5 years, come back over here and apply for a job when you don't have that, therapeutic device on your neck, and we'll hire you in a minute." So I couldn't get work. I ran out of my savings after a few months. I mean, I didn't have like, $100,000 in the bank. So I ran out of my savings. And finally, I was evicted from the small little one-room flat that I had rented after my relationship broke down. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't, I had no one that would take me in. Ray, I wound up living on the sidewalk, living as what they call a street person, for 2 weeks shy of 1 year. 50 weeks
Wow.
on the sidewalk, sleeping in the rain, in the cold, in the snow, and with no money in my pocket. I would wake up most mornings with, I'd lucky if I had 50 cents in my pocket. And that was the sum total of my possessions. 2 pair of pants, 3 shirts, 1 pair of shoes, and that was it. That's all I could carry with me in a knapsack.
And how long did you have to wear that collar while
A
you
year,
were?
a year and a half.
Oh my.
I had to wear it 18 months, and then they finally took it off and said your neck has totally fused. But in the meantime, I couldn't get work anywhere. So anyway, I wound up living on the sidewalk, and then when I did finally get, interestingly enough, a part-time job. Even with the collar, the guy was willing to hire me for a weekend part-time fill-in that didn't have a lot of physical exertion. It was a desk job.
Hmm.
I said, okay. So I took the job. I only got 2 days a week, 8 days a month. And I didn't get paid very much, but at least I could afford to go into a one-room flat above somebody's garage
Hmm.
in the backyard. And so I was, at least I was out of the weather. At least I was able to, sleep in the warm atmosphere of the apartment. And the best thing about the little apartment was it had a bathroom. Because
Good.
people
That's
don't think
good.
about it, but when you're living on the street, there's nowhere to use the bathroom.
Right.
You have to sneak into a restaurant and hope the manager doesn't throw you out, because he clearly sees that you're a street person. You smell like one, you look like one, you act like one. So they ask you to leave. They don't want you in there. They don't want you panhandling, the customers. So
Right.
as soon as they see you walk in, they ask you to leave, and they tell you if you don't leave, they'll call the police. So it's very, very difficult to live that way. But so then I sat down after I was in that one-room flat for about a month and a half or two. I woke up one morning at 2:30 in the morning, and I wrote an angry letter to God. I had a yellow legal pad on the coffee table. I was making lists of things I wanted to get on, and I wrote an angry letter to God. "Dear God," I wrote, "what does it take to make life work? Have I been such a bad person? Have I been so bad that I deserve one thing after another that's not working? What is it? What don't I understand here? If you have answers, I sure as hell like to know what they are." And I heard a voice in my head, Ray, say to me, "You are sure as hell, Neale, about a lot of things, but wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven?" And I'm running down, okay, what's that supposed to mean? Yeah, I'm running back and forth to this voice in my mind that says, "I'll give you the answers to your questions. And I was given the answers to all the questions that I asked, which sponsored other questions, which brought other answers, which produced other questions, which brought other answers. And before I knew it, Ray, I was involved in an on-paper, I want to say, dialogue with what I felt certain must be God, because the answers that I was getting were thoughts and responses that I would never have dreamt existed as truth. That is, I wouldn't have thought about it in my own mind. They were completely antithetical and actually disagreements and with what I had been taught as a child, contradictions, direct contradictions. For instance, I was given statements like, Neale, there's no such thing as right and wrong.
Right.
Neale, there's no such thing as the Ten Commandments. And other, dramatic statements that I thought, wait a minute, what is this? And I really thought, maybe, am I trafficking with the devil? What's going on here? But after pages and pages and pages of these kinds of questions and answers, I heard the following statement. The voice in my mind said, Neale, you will make of this one day a book, and it will be accessed by many people. And I thought, no, that's crazy. First of all, I didn't sit down to write a book. I was having what I thought was a very sacred experience in my mind, which, by the way, I should explain, went on for several weeks. It wasn't just one day. Every morning at around 4:23 or 4:25 in the morning, I'd wake up and there was more information coming to me. So I was writing down in handwritten notes as fast as I could. But I considered it to be, frankly, a very personal and sacred experience. It never occurred to me that any other human being in the world would ever see these back and forth notes, questions and answers. But when I was told, you will make of this a book and it will be accessed by many people, my first thought was, show me. That's not going to happen. No publisher is going to put out a book because a guy claims to be talking to God. So you know what I did, Ray? I actually Xeroxed. I went to the Xerox copying store and copied my handwritten notes and sent them off to a little publisher on the East Coast of the United States just to see what would happen. I got a call 3 or 4 weeks later from the guy who owned the company. It was a small publishing house. Maybe had 8 employees or 5, but it wasn't like Putnam or Random House. But it was a nice little publishing house. They put out maybe 5 or 8 books a year. And he said, we want to publish your book. I said, are you kidding me? He said, no, it's a great work of fiction. It's going to be on the fiction bestseller list. I said, whoa, wait a minute. You're not publishing it as a fiction book. And the publisher said, Mr. Walsh, are you trying to tell me you think this actually happened to you? We thought you just wrote a fantasy story about a guy who has an argument with, a conversation with God, asking all sorts of questions. I said, no. This actually happened in my life. So he said, well, okay, we could put it out as a nonfiction book, but it's not going to reach 500 readers because nobody's going to buy a book because the guy claims that God is talking directly to him. I mean, come on. And you know what? They did put it out just because they thought it was interesting material. And he was right. It didn't find 500 readers. It found 5 million.
What year was that? Was that 72?
Not bragging, just saying. It was in 1995. I recall, of course, the day that the book came out because it was so symmetrical. The date that the book was published was 5/5/95, May 5th, 1995. So 5/5/95, the book came out, and by January, it had sold millions of copies around the world and wound up, again, I'm not bragging, I'm just saying what happened. It just wound up being translated into 37 languages and sold from Russia to Japan to France, Spain, South America, Brazil. It was being read all over the world. I couldn't even, but so I said, okay, God, you win. Apparently, it really was a conversation with God.
And then it happened again for another book and again for another book.
Well, because because the publisher, wound up selling this little publisher on the East Coast, wound up selling the book to a major publishing house because when they saw the sales figures, they offered this small company a tiny sum to buy the title. Then the major publishing house, I think it was Putnam, called me and they said, their version of, do you have any sisters like that at home? And I said, well, I've been continuing to have my experience. I haven't stopped having the experience. I wasn't trying to write a book. This is a continuing event in my life. It goes on to this very day. And the New York publisher said, oh my gosh, can you send us more notes? Can you send us more information? I said, well, if you really think people would be interested. So I sent them, more of my notes. And I continued doing that because they continued publishing whatever I was sending them. And this went on for, frankly, a number of years until there wound up being a series of books called Conversations with God. Now, I want to say so people understand me, I don't consider myself to be any kind of spiritual teacher. I don't consider myself to be any more wise or, spiritually aware than anybody else. I'm just an average, everyday guy, a regular person, just an ordinary guy with my own faults and my own foibles, like all of us. I'm not a perfect individual, but I do take good notes. And I simply took notes on what I was told, what I was hearing in my mind, and the questions that I asked in response to what I was hearing. And I did send those to a publisher. And they wound up putting them into one book after the other until there wound up being 9 books in the dialogue series covering over 3,000 pages.
Wow. What is the distinction? Now, I've read some of those books, but right at the moment, I'm not clear. And I've read all of the 4, called books 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Conversations with God. So, what is the distinction between those 4 and the others?
Well, there is no distinction. They were simply, the conversation continued, but I didn't title every single dialogue A Conversation with God because it felt different. For instance, the second dialogue that I had, I wound up titling Friendship with God because it was all about how one can have a friendship with the divine. And I had asked God, how can I have a friendship? If there really is a God, if there really is a supreme being, could I have a regular friendship with God?
Mhm.
And I was given a book length answer to that question and other questions that arose as a result of it, which I call Friendship with God. Then I wrote another book called Communion with God, which was a first person dialogue, not really a dialogue, but a first person message that God sent to me with no questions from me at all.
Wow.
And so there were other titles that I gave to the books simply because that's how it occurred to me to refer to them. Communion with God, friendship with God, and home with God. The book Home with God talks about after death experiences. I asked God, well, what happens when you die?
Right.
And God gave me a full and complete explanation of what occurs with the soul after the soul departs the human body. And I call that book Home with God with its subtitle, Home with God in a Life That Never Ends. So there are only 4 books titled Conversations with God, and the other 5 books were given other titles,
Right.
such as the New Revelations.
Well, the last time that we got together in an interview, we in particular focused on Conversations with God, Book 4, Awaken the Species. And part of that was because I was very interested at that time. I think it was over 3 years ago. Um, and now I have a podcast with a different name, but that one interested me because, I was beginning to see, I think humanity needs to evolve in consciousness and awaken. And that book was about that very subject. So we talked about that. And I've read that book multiple times and I look at it frequently because it relates to the podcast I'm doing now, which is called New Ways of Being. And it's about how we people can be in the world in a more powerful, effective way than what most people are experiencing.
In a more divine way as
A
well.
more would be a good way of saying it, more divine way. Yes. So, well, that gives me a feel for the fact that you've had a continuous conversation going on with God over many, many years.
Well, all of us are having that experience, Ray.
Yes.
The point that's made in the dialogue, because I asked God, why me? Why would you choose me to have this kind of a conversation? And God said, oh, sweetheart, sweetheart, I'm not only talking to you, I'm communicating with every single sentient being in the cosmos, each in their own way, in 100 different ways, across 1,000 different moments in everyone's multiple lifetimes. So, some people, so what I've learned, Ray, is that some people don't call it a conversation with God. In fact, very few people would say that because they don't want to be marginalized or ridiculed, made fun of. So they say, I had an incredible insight yesterday, or I had a marvelous idea standing at the shower stall, or women's intuition, they'll call it women's intuition, or an epiphany. I had an epiphany.
Right.
But nobody says, I had a conversation with God, because, as I said, they don't want to be made fun of. So, but God made it clear to me that she is communicating with all of us all the time in many different ways across 1,000 moments. I said to God, well, give me an example then. If you're talking to everybody or communicating with everybody, give me an example of what you mean. God said, well, the lyrics of the next song you hear on the radio might be addressing something that you're looking at in your life right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or the chance utterance of the clerk at the post office, or the words on a billboard as you drive around the corner on the highway and see 12 big words 15 feet high on a billboard that just happen to address something that's been bothering you for the past 2 weeks.
Right.
Or the many, many other ways that we receive information to life, about life, through the process of life itself. When I have one of those moments, I call it a furtherance of my conversations with God. And then, I might even sit down and ask God some questions about it and write down the first thing that comes to my mind. And that's what I tell people. If you want to have your own conversation with God, just write down a question and then write the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't think about it. Don't try to come up with your answer. Just scribble down the first thing that comes to your mind. And it's amazing the wisdom that can often come through in a moment like that.
Yes. And so I have to tell you here, and I'm going to keep this very short because I want to have the focus on you and your book. But this past year in 2024, I had the amazing experience of suddenly being able to have conversations with God in the form of a dialogue, a two-way interaction. Now, I've had other experiences that are, serendipitous and something pointing me to, or to an idea. And I think it's my idea, but then I realize, well, it's probably a bigger idea than that. But what happened for me and I've shared this with my audience, so that's why I'm sharing it with you. Several things happened to me, and I know I was guided. One was I obtained a high energy crystal pendant and started wearing it. And I was also taught how to raise my energy by a quantum energy healer at about that same time. And a friend, or an acquaintance rather, who I had interviewed, he talks to angels, and he invited me to a course on talking to angels, which I attended. And after that, I tried talking with angels, and I was hearing responses in my mind, my head. And I later, and he taught to do automatic writing, to journal and do automatic writing. So I started doing that. And just as you said, the messages started coming to me while I was doing automatic writing. And it was clearly, to me, it was God speaking to me, and I was able to ask questions and get answers as you did. In fact, sometime later, I don't recall when, God one day said to me, I was asking, should I share with anyone that I can talk with God like this? I don't know that I should do that. And God said, please do so, because everyone should know that they can talk with God. And God also said, and you demonstrate that Neale Donald Walsch is not the only one who can have a conversation with me. So I've been sharing that, and I don't know how all people take it, but God asked me to specifically share that guidance, and it's not from me; it was from God. So, but it has been an incredible experience for me. So I can relate directly to everything you've been saying about it. And I don't, I think that the reason that I suddenly was able to do so was because I raised my energy or vibration, and I also learned how to measure it through kinesiology by a very big amount, like 100,000 vibrations per second. And from that, I believe that other people could do the same. But I haven't been teaching anyone to do that at this point.
Well, Ray, as I said a minute ago, I think other people are doing it. It's simply taking a different form.
Right.
Maybe they don't write a question and get an answer. Maybe they're just thinking about something for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, as I said, they turn the radio on and the lyrics of the song directly addressing, what they've been worried about.
Right.
So I think that we're all having conversations with God all the time, as I said a minute ago, but we're just simply calling it something else. And what's important for people to understand is there's no one way or right way to do it. So, that's just what I've come to understand.
Right. And so in part one of your book, you talk about understanding GodTalk and kind of introduce the whole subject. And in part two, you have in that book those examples that people submitted, evidently. I thought it was more than nine. At any rate, whatever the number is, I would have said 10 to 12 or 15. There are some great examples in there of how people have experienced having interaction with God in some form.
Direct interaction with the divine, yes. And it's happening to more people than we might know, because it's not something people loosely talk about.
Right. Absolutely. And that, in a sense, is a shame, but
Yes.
I've come to view it's a reflection on our level of consciousness. or we could say our level of involvement in humanity in the world. But I kind of simplify it, my own way of thinking. Most human consciousness is very based in ego. Belief in separation is a big part of it. And that belief in separation leads to a lot of fear and all of the related behaviors that come out of fear, violence and, uncivility, whatever the right word is. I'm not saying that right, incivility. Um, and if we could only learn to shift to unity and love, I think a lot of things would begin to change. But how that's going to happen is a big question mark. It's not something that's easy to convey and to teach people, or, everyone has their own beliefs, and, religions have a whole big structure around it. And so they would dismiss, oh, no, there isn't a one God consciousness that everybody's a part of. God is separate, etc. All of those messages. And I know you've looked at that, and do you think there's an answer to that, how we're going to change as a human species?
I think that we will change as a human species, to use your exact words, when we reach critical mass in the number of people who embrace the notion that, number one, God exists, there really is a supreme being, that number two, we are all one, that there's no separation between us and each other, and there absolutely is no separation between us and God.
Right.
And number three, that our purpose here on this earth, and anywhere for that matter in the physical realm, all sentient beings in the cosmos share a single purpose, which is not to move forward in our career or have a big car in the driveway or make sure we have all the things that make us happy in life. It's okay to do that, but that's not our purpose in life. That we are misunderstanding who we really are. That most people think that who they are is a body with a mind, and their job is to get through, the 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 years that they have on the planet,
Right.
which in comparison to eternity is, the blink of an eye. And that our job here is to do the best we can, and achieve whatever we can achieve and get through without hurting ourselves and hopefully without hurting others. But there's more going on here than meets the eye, in my understanding. And so I think that what will happen, how we can change here in the next years to come, is when we reach critical mass in the number of people who understand who they really are, that we are not this and not this. I'm not my body and I'm not my mind.
Right.
These are simply tools, pieces of equipment that who I really am use in order to achieve its agenda.
Right.
And who I really am is a spiritual entity having a physical experience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I understand that that's who I really am, which is interesting because many religions teach us this, but what they teach us thereafter may not be the complete story. But there are many religions that teach us that we are actually souls, spiritual entities having a physical experience. And so that's not a brand new idea, but the new idea is how to make that practical in our daily life. When we reach critical mass in the number of people who make it practical in their daily life, the first domino will fall and the rest of the dominoes will follow. And then we will see a major change in the world. We will see behaviors change. We will no longer use violence to end our disagreements. We will no longer use abuse of other people to satisfy our own yearnings. And we will no longer imagine that we are out here all by ourselves. We will see every other entity as simply another aspect, is the word I would use, another aspect of who we really are, simply in a different life form, but that we are all one.
Right. The book Awaken the Species is full of so much information and guidance about awakening, and you made me think about a couple of specific things in that book. And I know we're here to talk about your newer book, but
Doesn't matter. I'm not here to talk about it. I'm not trying to sell anything or get anything accomplished. So let the conversation go wherever you want it to go.
well, the Awaken the Species book, one of the things that really stood out to me, and I think it was actually in some of the earlier conversations with God books, but God said that he created sentient beings like ourselves to participate as divine individuations in creating the life we want to create. And that is totally different than what people think or understand. But once you begin to understand what is being taught, we can I can see I have that power, that capability to create that which I would like to experience. And the other thing, go ahead.
No,
The
the
other
other
thing
thing,
was that there was a whole chapter on 14. I'm trying to remember the words that were used in the book, but behaviors of
differences,
highly
14,
evolved. I'm sorry.
16 differences between highly evolved people and those of us who are living in an unawakened state.
Yes. And so in that, there is so much guidance about how we could be evolving differently and living differently. And when you take it as one thing, it looks, and you even commented on that in the book, it looks like a huge, huge challenge. But if we explore into it, there are, in some ways, many people try to observe most of those now. We just don't do it every day and collectively.
Nor do we do it with a particular purpose in mind. We don't do it as a visual and immediate physical demonstration of our true identity. We do it because our culture tells us, nice people do this and not nice people do that and so forth. But
Right.
we're disconnected from our actual, as the French would say, raison d'etre. We don't understand our reason for being. Once we understand our reason for being, then we wind up doing those things. We wind up exhibiting those 16 differences for a particular reason, in order to demonstrate and to experience who we really are
Right.
as individual expressions of divinity.
Right. So that's kind of going into a bigger topic, but in God Talk, I think one of the key points is that God can. I'm trying to remember the word you used in the book, but provide guidance or interaction or direction, and it can be about anything that's going on in someone's life, right? It doesn't have to be a big, huge purpose. It can be something that is right for us in the moment.
Yes, that's been not only my understanding, but my experience. All I have to do is listen to myself. When I'm having any kind of encounter, Ray, it might be just a simple disagreement with my wife, or a challenge that I'm facing in my business world, or an obstacle that I'm encountering in my interaction with the neighbor across the street. It could be anything really.
Right?
But when I ask myself life's magic question, wait a minute. What does this have to do with the agenda of my soul?
Mm-hmm.
When I place what's going on over there in that contextual field, my response becomes entirely different. I no longer respond from my ego. I respond from what my soul would call forth if I were paying attention to my soul's agenda and to my real reason for being in a physical body. And that has changed, frankly, my entire life.
Yes. I've, I think in that very same book, you spoke of that. And that's a good kind of question to ask oneself. What does this have to do with my soul
The,
agenda?
yeah, what does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? You know, I want to make a point here. I left in the book called GodTalk a 6-step process that people could use to have their own conversation with God.
Right.
Step number 1, possibility. They must agree that it's possible that A, God exists, and B, God would talk to every ordinary average person like you and me.
God is personal.
Yes. Step number 2 is worthiness. We must embrace our own worthiness. We don't have to be the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury or the chief ulama or the head rabbi for God to talk with us. God will even talk to Ray and Neale. And so we have to embrace our own worthiness, which leads us to step number 3, which is willingness. We need to be willing to have a conversation with God, even though most of the world's 4,000 religions tell us that if we say we're having a conversation directly with God, that we are blaspheming,
Right.
that we are an apostate, that we are a heretic. And so we have to be willing to stand up against the cultural bias that says, no. God does not talk to you or through you. So stop saying that she does, which takes us to step number 4, which is wakefulness. Stay awake to all the ways in which God's communications are flowing to us, which takes us to step number 5, acceptance. Don't reject the information you're receiving from life and just saying, it's just my imagination.
Right.
You know, I'm just or it was, like you said, serendipity, just a piece of, an amazing coincidence. And people do that. They receive incredible insights and they call it, well, it's just my imagination, or it was just a coincidence. And I asked God about that, Ray. I said, how do I know this is not my imagination?
Right.
And God said, wait a minute. What makes you think I wouldn't use your imagination?
Right.
Where did Mozart's music come from? Where did Michelangelo's art come from?
Right.
Where does any great creation come from if it doesn't start somewhere in somebody's imagination? Imagine what if this, what if that? And then we start following that trail and wind up creating something often that's magnificent. So God said to me, just because you think it might be your imagination doesn't mean that it's invalid. Do not invalidate your own imagination. And that takes us finally to step number 6, which is discernment. How to discern the difference between genuine communications from the divine and events and circumstances that come to us or through us or that occur in our life in a different way or from a different source. You know, as an example, I'm walking to my car in the parking lot and I reach into my pocket to grab my car keys, and some paper money that I had in my pocket happens to fall out on the ground as I'm pulling my car keys out of my pocket. So I think, it's a sign. I'm supposed to take all my paper money out of my pocket and throw it on the ground. No. It's just what happened. It was an accident, folks. You know, so discern the difference between what's an actual communication from the divine and what is just something that just happened. So those 6 steps: Possibility, worthiness, willingness, wakefulness, acceptance, and discernment are discussed in great detail, much more than I'm doing here, but in the book God Talk, to help us have our own conversation with God in a meaningful and beneficial way.
Very good. Well, Neale, I think we're running out of time here, and this is probably a very good point to come to an end. This has been absolutely wonderful to have you on the show, to hear you talk about the book God Talk, and to share your insights, having written the book. But I think the key that you're communicating is just so important, that God is there and talking to us all the time, and we do have to choose to stop and listen.
Well, we
So,
don't have to, but we're invited to, for sure.
right,
There's nothing that we have to do. There are no supposed to in the universe, but we are certainly invited to. And those who accept the invitation, I think, wind up benefiting from that choice.
very good. Anything else you'd like to add?
I was asked on the Today Show, Matt Lauer, a few years ago, he was interviewing me on the Today Show. He said, Neale, if you think you really talk to God, what's God's most important message to the world? And he said, could you put it in one paragraph? We have only 30 seconds in the interview. And I thought, you stinker, you would ask me the biggest question of all time when we have 30 seconds left in the interview. So I thought, what am I going to say to this guy? We're on national television. But then God gave me the answer. And I said, Matt, I don't need one paragraph, and I don't even need 30 seconds. I can give you God's message to the world, God's most important message to the world, in 5 words. You've got me all wrong.
Yes. And you wrote a whole book on that.
I don't judge, condemn, or punish anyone, and you've got me all wrong. I don't need you to behave in certain ways. I don't need you to not eat or eat certain food, not wear or wear certain clothing. I don't need you to speak in a certain way. Nothing that I need from you in order for me to be happy. My will for you is your will for you. But look to see how you are creating your life. And if that's the way you want to live, if that satisfies you, by golly, go for it.
All right. Well, if there are any listeners on who have not read you Got Me All Wrong, you should read that book as well as God Talk. They both provide incredible insights.
Yeah, the book is called God's Message to the World.
Oh, right.
You've got me all wrong.
Okay, got it. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here, Neale. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us, and keep on doing all the good work that you're doing.
Well, I hope that is good work. Thank you, Ray. Those are very kind words to say to me, and I've enjoyed being here. Thanks for the invitation.
All right. Oh, and to all the listeners, have a great day and a great life.